I want to give a big thank you to all my patrons, and I'll be doing a Kingsguard roll call after today's video. Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and today we're doing part 2 of my either or. If you missed part 1, I have a whole video going over like Malazan versus A Song of Ice and Fire, and a lot of other really tough questions here on the channel. You can go check that out. But essentially, these were questions that I asked you, the viewers, to go to my community tab on a post and ask me some of the harder hitting questions. So this will be part 2 to this. I had a massive response to that, so I appreciate the interaction a ton. And I'm going to try to make my way through part 2 of this. There might be a part 3. The part 3 questions would be probably a lot more specific to series versus series, character arcs, and things like this. I'm trying to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, so we'll see what I'll do for part 3. But part 2, this should be all spoiler-free and a really good time, and maybe make me sweat just a little bit. Messy678 asked, only stick to a TBR or only mood read forever, new releases or backlist? I would actually pick mood reading. I kind of do a little bit of both. It's very fluent. I have things that I definitely want to get done, like maybe 10 books that I'm like for sure wanting to get done in a year, but I read anywhere between 50 to 60 books a year, so most of the time those other books are kind of just feeling it out. And when it comes to new releases versus backlist, I think maybe a year ago, it would have been obvious as a backlist, but it's getting a little more difficult just because I'm crossing off a lot of the things that I wanted to experience, especially in the fantasy genre. So I'm still going to pick backlist, but in the future, I would really like to read more new releases. But if I had to pick, I think going with the old tried and true books probably are just a better bet. This is a wild question from my wild friend Fever. It says, new format with chatting with Nuts after a time of leisurely activities, forest rave and natural goodies with China Mieville, or desert camping and cardamom coffee with P. Desley Clark. I'm going to pick P. Desley Clark because seems like a swell dude. I think also just being able to ask him about his experiences in life would be so varied to what I have experienced, and it would be really cool. Plus, cardamom coffee is banging, so I would go with that. Also, China Mieville, natural goodies sounds fun, but China Mieville's so smart that I feel like I would spend so much time probably being ridiculed for being like a consumerist or something. It would be most likely enlightening, but also very demeaning. Manyface Dylan asks one of the better questions. It says, a world where Patrick Rothfuss wrote A Song of Ice and Fire, or where GRRM wrote Kingkiller? Well, either damn way, my story's not getting finished. I would definitely pick if George R. R. Martin wrote Kingkiller. And the reason for that is that I just feel like George's range is so much broader. And also, I wonder what Quoth would be like if George had wrote him. I don't really think there's any characters in A Song of Ice and Fire I'd be like, I'd like to see Patrick Rothfuss's take on that character. And that's not a diss to Patrick Rothfuss. I just like George R. R. Martin more. Ali asked a couple different questions here, and I think what I'll do is just answer maybe 3 of them. We'll see. Let's see. So his first question is, if you could choose one author to write your life story, who would it be? That would be Robin Hobb. I think Robin Hobb would be able to put into words some of the things that I have struggled with in my life beautifully, and I don't know if I could even find the descriptions that she would be able to find. So for me personally, I think it would have to be Robin Hobb. I also think that she would round out all the characters around me and probably give them more benefit of the doubt than me, which would be refreshing, to say the least, because I always think of myself as the good guy, as many of us do. I think she would be able to add a lot of layers of perspectives to the side characters, even if it was written in a first-person narration. So for me, it would be Robin Hobb, without a doubt. And then would I rather lose reading or lose jiu-jitsu? I would definitely rather lose jiu-jitsu, not even close. Lucas Williams asking a barn burner of a question. He says, Berserk or Monster? And then also squats or deadlifts. So between Berserk and Monster, Berserk has more of my emotional attachment to it, which 90% of the time means that it's going to be the winner. When something gives me more of a visceral emotional reaction, it's usually ranked higher than things, even if I think that, you know, there's more merit to something else. However, Berserk is not finished, and there's also the question of how it will finish, and Miura is clearly not going to be the one continuing it. I've heard good things about the new chapters, but for me personally, Monster from beginning to end, and the way the end goes out, and very, very fitting to what I like in a story. And I also think that as a whole, Monster might be the best entry point for so many people into manga, or even be the exception for people who don't enjoy that medium. So I'm going to pick Monster. Squats or deadlifts? I'm picking squats. Tom Platt's School of Thought. Let's go. Maggie the Stray. I hope you find a home. A bleak world with funny characters or a funny world with bleak characters? Without a doubt, a bleak world with funny characters. I immediately think of First Law. I think whenever you have a funny world with bleak characters, sometimes it can come off a little too much for me. Whenever, it's just the pessimistic character in a funny world, so everything around it's supposed to be funny. Whereas a bleak world, I don't know, it's the setting, so there's more atmosphere that maybe feels like it's more of a downer. So the funny characters tend to be a relief from that. Now, having a pessimistic character in a funny world can work, but I think on by large, for me, I would much rather have funny characters in a bleak world. Who's darker, Hobb or Abercrombie? This is a really tough question. I think Abercrombie is, what, everyone throws around the terms grim, dark, yada, yada, yada. I think he's like the mainstream version of that. There are people who go way, 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 way more pessimistic than him and are definitely a lot more vile. However, Abercrombie does handle some pretty intense things, and maybe some would say it is a look at a nihilistic perspective of life and worth and meaning. Hobb is dark for the fact that she puts her characters through the ringer, some of which isn't even physical. Some of it's just mental turmoil. I think if I had to pick the darker one, it would be Abercrombie. I felt a sense of hope in Realm of the Elderlings at many, many points, whereas with Joe Abercrombie, I don't know if I ever felt hope. And if I did, it was usually quickly grasped away from me. I don't think neither of them really believe in happy endings, but there's something more, I don't know. There's just something more hopeful about Hobb in certain scenes. So I would say that Abercrombie is still darker, even though Hobb maybe does a better job for me and my money of tapping into like the human condition and the struggles of that. Becky Lanaway says Tejo or Bug or Locke and Jean. I would pick Tejo and Bug, barely. The Hound or Karsa Orlong. The Hound, actually. That might be a hot take. Orcs or Shrunk. Shrunk are just absolutely disgusting and horrible, and I love them. Series or standalone? If series, then trilogy or a longer series. So I'm going to take these at their very best, like the very best standalone versus the very best series. Between a trilogy and a longer series, again, if it's at its best, I'll take a longer series. I would love to get lost in like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 books even, like I did in Malazan or Realm of the Elderlings, Song of Ice, any of these. Dagger and the Coin would also be another example of that. So I think that also, I would say I enjoy series, even though a lot of the times I'm looking for standalones and I'm trying to find shorter books to read just to kind of spread out the love a little bit. When it's a great series and it's at its best, there's nothing better than knowing that there's another book in the pipeline. It's awesome. AJ Pruitt, read a series with a fantastic start but dubious ending, or a rocky start but wonderful ending. I think I have made it clear that I enjoy beginnings more than endings, especially in videos like this or on Chatting with Nuts, and how I am a lot more forgiving to endings that tend to be dubious by other means. I have found myself on the hot take side of, polarizing endings, Dark Tower being one of many, and other ones. And I have feelings about why that is and everything. But it's hard to say that a rocky start with a wonderful ending isn't just better for the masses. I think when writing a wonderful ending is tougher than writing a wonderful start. And also there's opportunities in a series, at least, for an author to grow as the series goes on. So I think I am personally going to pick rocky start but wonderful ending, even though for my subjective taste and my experience reading, I have definitely been okay with an amazing start where the ending just kind of, as long as you don't become apathetic. That's the worst thing that can happen. But to write a wonderful ending is something special. Colin's Corner, thanks for coming over, says classic fantasy tropes or subversions of them. It depends on my mood, and we've seen so many subversions that at times I am begging someone to just go back to the well and just reimagine it a little bit. It doesn't need to be subverted, but just do it in a new way. However, I'm going to pick subversions because I feel like most of my favorite series are subversions of those tropes. Kev L4R says, Assassin's Fate or the Crippled God? Okay. So I'm going to pick Assassin's Fate because of the emotional turmoil it put me through, and also just the journey and everything. I don't know if a book's ever grabbed me quite like that, wherever I was hanging on every single word, and it really messed with me a lot. The Crippled God is fantastic. It's an achievement. It's the capstone to an amazing series that I think is one of the pillars of fantasy and one of my all-time favorite series. I like Malazan more than Realm of the Elderlings as a whole. But for these books pinned against each other, I would say Assassin's Fate. Another Sarah reading asked me, child teenage protagonist or a more mature protagonist? Easily more mature. I wish I read more stories with mature protagonists. There's times where I get exhausted by knowing that if a 16-year-old is our main character, they're going to do the really dumb things that I expect them to do. And yes, it's realistic, but can I just get someone who's in a midlife crisis that is sick of the monotony of their everyday? This is a Akamian in Prince of Nothing. Akamian is a middle-aged wizard who hates his job, hates his bosses. No one's listening to him, even though he knows better than them, but he doesn't rank as high, so he can't be listened to. You see what I'm saying? I also think of Misaki, or I think that was her name, Misaki from the Sword of Kaigen. Also another little bit of an older perspective, a mom's perspective. That sticks out to me. That stands out as something really, really special. Whereas, you know, I've read so many young protagonists that it's hard for them to matter in my mind at this point. So both can be done well, but I would love to see more and more stories with mature protagonists for sure. Connor K wants to know first person or third person POV. It's hard not to pick third person POV because I feel like there's just more variants of that. We can go omniscient, limited, we get the unreliable narrator, even though you can also do that in first person a bit. And then obviously we have present and past, which first person has as well. But when it's written at its very best, first person, I think, just gives me some sort of intimate experience. I find myself being able to immerse a little bit more, especially if I can connect with that first person POV, and it's someone that might even make decisions kind of like me, or think like me, or go through similar things. It really goes a long way to put me into their shoes. On the flip side of that, if I'm not meshing with the character, that can be really tough. Third person POV is able to do that as well, but I think at its very best, first person is still my favorite, which is funny because I think when I started my channel like 3.5 years ago, I had just been reading A Song of Ice and Fire over and over and over and over again in Lord of the Rings. And I was like, I don't even really like first person. And then I read more first person works, which I think that happens to us a lot as readers. We take our limited experience as a reason to say we dislike something, when what we really mean is we just don't have a ton of experience with that form of storytelling or whatever it might be. This happens a lot with nautical fantasy. People say they don't like nautical fantasy. I'm one of the people who do that, but I have now found, as I read more books with boats in them, that I really don't mind it. I just like it when it's done a certain way or when it's done really, really well. So for this, as a flip of events over the last 3 years, I actually think I prefer the first person. Darth Andy asks, free will or determinism? And I'm assuming you're asking me my opinion on our reality and what we're experiencing right now as I stare into this camera. And I am not an authority on this. I'm not well educated on this at all. I've just read some pop science stuff that probably doesn't hold up in a peer review. I would probably put my money on determinism. That's where I would hang my hat. If DraftKings had like a 4-legger parlay and I needed to add a fifth or add the fourth, I would probably put it on determinism here, if that makes any sense for those watching. It's kind of nihilistic, I guess, but at the same time, in a weird way, to me, it's a little bit freeing. And maybe it's enough to cut yourself a little bit of a break at times, though I could also see it being a tool for excusing some terrible things. So it's a complicated thing. But I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to check this out. And I want to thank everyone who submitted questions for this. If your question hasn't been answered, it should be answered in a later video at some point. And if you like this video, you can hit like. If you dislike it and hated my answers, you can hit dislike. If you loved it, think about subscribing. I do all types of bookish content, reviews, hopefully more live streams for spoiler discussions and everything else. I'd love to have you here on the channel. There is a Patreon in the description. It's optional, but always appreciated. And until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page. Want to give a big shout out to my Wildlings Knights watching Kingsguard. My Kingsguard include Lauren, Henrik, Kai, Eric B, Oscar, Stewart, Stephen R, Ikaika, Amanda, RJ Shaw, Nicoletta Tanner, Jennifer, Garrick, Frank C, Fever, Matthias J, Sarah, Pat, Prithvi, Kevin, Ryan, Michael, Terrence, Wade, Darren, Taylor D, Derry, John C, Bass, Mitch, Sebastian, Benjamin, Jobot, Noel, Amanda L, Nicholas, C. Scott, Steve Talks Books, John, Chadia, Yolanda, Carlos, Jonathan J, Caitlin S, and Evie, and Curtis L. Thank you all so much. You're the best.